I am Crystal Gamradt, and I have been an archivist here for 19 years. I have worked for the university for 25. And in those 19 years here in the archives, I have learned a lot about SDSU history and Hobo Day, probably more than one will ever need to know, but I know it. Recently, I've had the pleasure of scanning all of the SDSU Hobo Day photos that the university has accumulated over the years and making them available online. We have over 5,700 images on the line right now, and hopefully we're going to be getting a whole bunch more here next couple days. So before I do get started with my presentation, I just want to make a little warning that this history of Hobo Day does span over 11 decades. In the early years of Hobo Day, some of the practices they had may be considered today offensive. And I just want to warn some people about some of those things. We're not here to condone or promote any of these practices, but we're just here to present them. So without further ado, Hobo Day is the homecoming celebration for South Dakota State University, has been for over 100 years. It has been billed as the biggest one-day event in the Dakotas. Alumni and students and jackrabbit enthusiasts from all over come to Brookings, South Dakota to celebrate a weekend of football and fun and memories. So Hobo Day's roots can be traced back to November 1907, when students, wearing their nightshirts, marched through the streets of Brookings. That fall, SDSC was to play a game with Dakota Wesleyan at a home game here in Brookings. And the students were very, very hungry for a win, and they wanted to stir up some enthusiasm for the game. So they decided on a nightshirt parade, where the men would dress in their nightshirts and the women would dress in sheets. The 1909 Jackrabbit yearbook describes this event. It was the eve of the game with Dakota Wesleyan, and in order to stir up some enthusiasm among students and some of the dormant members of town in the college, the people of Brookings, they decided on a nightshirt parade. This was a certainly queer-looking aggregation, nightshirts of every description. Branches were stripped from the trees in the grove to make a roaring bonfire. Songs and speeches were rendered in a fitting manner, and one after another the college yells were given. As the fire began to die down, torches were prepared, and a line of march was formed. And, headed by the band, they started for the city. Arriving downtown, they gently removed from the Opera House any lukewarm students and made them don nightshirts and get in line. A grand march was enacted on Main Street, and the noise shook the buildings. I imagine it was quite a sight seeing hundreds of students marching through the streets of Brookings in their pajamas. The students continued this tradition every year until 1911. It was then that the college decided that it was undignified and unladylike for women to dress up in sheets and wander the streets. So as a result, the nightshirt parade had ended. A new tradition was needed, but what? A group of students, Roy Nord, R. Adams Dutcher, Ben Shaphorst, and Harry Rilling, took it upon themselves to look for the possibilities for a substitute. Ultimately, it was Dutcher who brought the Hobo Day concept to the Brookings campus. He had seen a Hobo Day celebration at the University of Missouri. The event failed there because too many actual hobos turned out for the event, and it scared off the college students. So the students at SDSU thought that the Hobo Day concept would work here if they took some proper precautions. Mass meetings were held and rules were adopted to govern the day's proceedings. Rules about shaving and dressing in the appropriate attire were among them. For instance, any man who shaved after Monday morning of Hobo Week was voted into the Bull Moose Club. Classes after 10 a.m. were canceled. Students who did attend the first two classes had to wear the appropriate costumes. Here we have U.S. Congressman Ben Rifle, who was a student here in the 30s. He was dressed as a hobo. And then we have a hobo here by the name of Charles Halloran, and he won the first prize for hobo in 1928. And the girls were to dress as fair Indian maidens. The morning of November 2nd, 1912, the hobos and Indian maidens met in the campus chapel, and then they marched for the train depot to meet the Yankton football team. Bandmaster Carl Christensen's hobo band led the way. Close behind was a hobo flag of peace. This was 4 bandana handkerchiefs sewn together and tied to a fishing pole. This motley procession marched downtown to Kendall's Corner at 4th and Main, and the band performed there. From there, a rush was made for the meat markets, the bakeries, the grocery stores, and some Brookings homes to gather items for their hobo day meals. Here's a couple of students bumming their items for their stew from a Brookings resident. The students then walked to the jungles of the college grove to prepare their hobo dinner. With the assistance of town law enforcement, who promptly took care of any unlooked-for visitors, the new homecoming celebration was a huge success. The marching from campus to the train depot soon developed into a parade, complete with marching bands, parade floats, and dignitaries. The parade is led by a Grand Marshal, who is a notable alumni or a dignitary selected by the Grand Poobah, who is the chairman of the Hobo Day Committee. In 1960, Carl Christensen, known as Christie, the bandmaster, was the Grand Marshal. And in 2004, Jerry Lohr was the Grand Marshal. Dignitaries are also a part of the parade. In 1963 is South Dakota Governor Archie Gamradt, and in 1971, Governor Richard Knipe. And here is Daphne Chaplin Searles, who was the first Hobo Day Queen in 1912. She was riding in the Hobo Day Parade in 1963. She was brought back many years and was known as the oldest living alum for many, many years. Floats are built by students to represent their classes. Here we have some class of 1950 float in the 1949 parade, and also the class of 1954, freshman and the senior float. And here's a senior class float from 1954 and a junior class float from the 1958 parade. Students also built floats to represent student organizations. Here's a couple of egg club floats from 1940s, a dairy club float in 47, and a block and bridle club float in 53. Economics club and the Roger Williams Club, which was our religious organization. During the 40s and 50s, the floats began to grow in size. There's another religious organization, the Wesley Club, in 1947 and 48, the Home Ec Club, and the Pharmacy Float from the 50s. By the 1960s, the floats could be described as enormous and spectacular. Due to safety concerns and collapsing floats due to their enormous size, floats began to be built smaller into more manageable portions by the 1970s. But floats are always interesting and unique. I especially like the Hoboat, and they're always entertaining. Here's the pharmacy float with Elvis on it, and the farmhouse float in 2005, and you'll notice the grill on the end. One particular float that caused a sharp decline in float building was an elaborate float that had an outhouse on the back, and you can see far across the plains of Brookings, as far as I can see, stands an old abandoned outhouse called the University. Wonder where that came from. After several newspapers in the region declared that the SDSU students were vulgar, the university shied away from these large and obscene floats. Parade floats competed for prizes, including beautiful and most outstanding. Here's a most clever float, won by the University Danes Club in 1958. Best religious float, also in 58. Pharmacy was notorious for winning best float. John Bibby from the class of 1942 has been noted as saying that the pharmacy students were always very good float builders, that they spent a lot more time on the construction of their float, but he said that they also had a course in window decorating back then. This one won most beautiful and most outstanding in 59. Another one, most beautiful and most outstanding in 60. And you certainly don't see floats like these anymore. Most beautiful in 62. Birds were obviously a very big theme back then. This one won most outstanding in 1970. Floats range from the beautiful to the bizarre, big and small, but no matter what size they are always entertaining and full of SDSU pride. Speaking of pride, what is a parade without marching bands? Christie's marching band was a staple of the Hobo Day parades in the 40s and the 50s. Carl Christensen, or Christie as he was known, served as the band master at South Dakota State College from 1911 to 1954. His band was very well known throughout the region. He even played for Britain's King George VI and Queen Elizabeth in Winnipeg, Canada in 1939. The pride of the Dakotas has been part of the Hobo Day parade since the mid-1960s. Pride performs during the parade and the pregame and at all halftime activities at all Jackrabbit football games. The band has toured the upper Midwest extensively. It has presented shows at NFL football games, performed in U.S. presidential inaugural parades in Washington, D.C., and has twice performed in the Tournament of Roses parade in Pasadena, California. The Pride of the Dakotas is one of the largest organizations on campus. They are certainly a family, and throughout the years, these members have forged great friendships and have had many memories that last a lifetime. Over the years, many traditions have become part of Hobo Day. In 1936, in an effort to reignite school spirit at homecoming, the Blue Key Smoker was created. This was hosted in honor of the football team by the Blue Key, which is a national senior men's honorary fraternity. They either met in the Christie Ballroom in Pugsley Union or in the barn for free smokes, a barbecue supper, and hours of speeches, laughs, and singing. Except for women serving cigarettes and food, women were banished from the smoker. These are cigarette girls who would walk around in cigarettes for members. And then here is Charles Coughlin of the Coughlin Campanile here at the smoker in 1961. Instead of the smoker, the women would go and watch a movie downtown, and then they would march back to campus in something called the Torchlight Parade. The parade ignited excitement and school spirit. An added tradition was to hold a pep rally on the corner of 4th and Main. It's a very popular spot downtown, and they had their own band and cheerleaders. Other years, they met the manna after the smoker for a bonfire and a pep rally on campus, and then they would have a dance in front of Pugsley Student Union. Another tradition that dates back to at least the 1940s is Kangaroo Court. It was organized again by Blue Key as a lighthearted means of enforcing Hobo Week traditions, such as not shaving and wearing pigtails. Almost every dependent was found guilty in order to perform some zany act. Here's a blindfolded man, and he's putting on some makeup on another gentleman, and here they're getting their toenails painted. And here's a poor soul, he's getting dumped into a water tank, and you'll notice again that he is blindfolded. I think that was popular. And here he's hanging laundry on a clothesline, once again blindfolded. And here's a jury member, and he's reading a newspaper with a pretty girl on his lap darning his sock. And of course, the crowd that gathered in the barn to watch the proceedings was always very amused. Some traditions have disappeared over time, but whiskers and the decision to grow them as a timeless tradition. Early in Hobo Day history, men would devote 2 weeks to beard growing. Soon the standard was 3 weeks of growth before Hobo Day. By the late 30s, 1 month club was fully established. To kick off the 1 month club, members of Blue Key, in a ceremony of mock solemnness, would don black robes and serve as pallbearers for burying the razor. An 8-foot-long replica of a straight-edge razor was brought onto the football field in a procession that was led by the Beemobile. The event took place at halftime at a football game 1 month before Hobo Day and included a recitation of the razor rules. Some of these rules were Natural growth of beards were not to be hampered or disfigured by trimming in any way. Men who deemed it necessary to shave had to apply for a shaving permit by the Board of Regulation, which met from 12:30 to 1 o'clock every day in the Pugsley Union. All violators of these regulations were subject to action by the Kangaroo Court, and a full proceedings of the court would be published in the Collegian. Judging of the beards was taken very seriously. Here she's measuring his beard, and this guy has got a magnifying glass. I think he's probably looking for his beard. And of course, pigtails were also very carefully inspected. Prizes, of course, were given to the winners. In 1956, some of the winners were for the longest beard, the most ticklish beard, the blondest beard, the reddest beard, the blackest beard, the most handsome beard, the ugliest beard, and best try in growing a beard. Prizes for the pigtails were longest pigtails, shortest braided pigtails, most pigtails, cutest pigtails, and decorative pigtails. Over the years, other Hobo Day Week activities have come and gone. A tradition that most likely grew out of the first Hobo Day in 1912 was the eating of bum stew. This event was held each year on campus, on the campus green by Sylvan Theater and in the shadow of the campanile. And bum stew was usually served in coffee tins. Another tradition was the Hanson Hall bed races. Students would use their bed frames from their dorm rooms, and they would add wheels and a steering wheel, and then they would race it all over campus. Bum Olympics is another activity that occurred. Teams from various campus organizations and residence halls would compete in a variety of hobo activities. Of course, faculty and staff always get in on the fun during Hobo Week. Here's President Briggs in '72 and President Wagner in '92, dressed up as bums. Of course, the character that most personifies the spirit of Hobo Day is Worry Will. Worry Will, who was originally called Worry Willie, got a start as a caricature drawn on the wall of the Jungle Cafeteria in Pugsley Union in 1941. In 1950, the Brookings Chamber of Commerce asked the State College president, Fred Leimbach, for a show of support for a commercial airline service that was going to start at the New Brookings Airport. Walt Conahan, who was then the Collegian editor, joined Leimbach and other dignitaries for a short airplane flight to Huron for a brief welcoming ceremony for that community. Conahan then changed into Worry Will's costume and boarded the plane and then departed back for Brookings. When the plane landed, Will was greeted by the Hobo Day chairman, the Students' Association president, and 500 students. Worry Will then jumped into the Beemobile and was driven around Brookings, followed by about 30 cars, and was led by a police escort. Worry Will has returned to campus every year since 1950. He is chosen by the Grand Poobah with input from the Alumni Association. The person portraying Worry Will is usually served on the Hobo Day Committee or has dedicated immense amount of time and effort to the Hobo Day tradition. He remains anonymous until he is revealed at halftime of the Hobo Day football game. Worry Will truly embodies the Hobo Day spirit and is an outstanding advocate for the biggest one-day event in the Dakotas. There has always been some type of female character since the early days of Hobo Day. Samantha Jane was part of Hobo Day in 1912. She was a character who came from Chicago, and she flirted with all of the hobos in an effort to gain the right to vote for women. But unfortunately, she was lost to history. Dressed in ragged hippie hobo wear, Dirty Lil became part of the Hobo Day tradition in 1976. Dirty Lil's character was derived from a drinking song that the committee had found in a book of songs that they sang at gatherings. The song went like this: Dirty Lil, lives on top of Garbage Hill. Never took a bath, never will. Then you're supposed to clear your throat and spit. Dirty Lil. I'm not going to do that. Each year, the Hobo Day Committee chooses an alumnus to play the role of Dirty Lil, and she is selected from prominent graduates and is usually served on the Hobo Day Committee. Each year, the Hobo Day Committee chooses an alumnus to play the role of Dirty Lil, and she is selected from prominent graduates and is usually served on the Hobo Day Committee. Dirty Lil and Worry Will are now immortalized in bronze statues on the north side of the University Student Union on the campus. The Beemobile is also a very iconic part of Hobo Day. Fred Weigel, a Flandreau farmer, donated his 1912 Ford Model T in 1938. For decades, it has led the Hobo Day Parade. Over the years, it has given many rides to dignitaries, including some politicians. Among them are Senator George McGovern on the left, he's in the back. And on the right is Congressman Ben Rifle, who was an alum, and Governor Niels Bohr. And of course, U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower rode in the Beemobile. He came to Brookings in 1952 while he was campaigning for president. He was asked if he'd like to hop in the Beemobile, and he did. Contrary to popular belief, however, he was not part of a Hobo Day Parade. The Beemobile has had a few bumps over the years. Its brakes gave out once. It caught fire one year. It even lost a wheel while going down Madera Avenue. And in 2006, it had to be pushed throughout the entire parade route. It was in dire need of help. In 2008, electrical engineering graduate Harold Hobach, he graduated in '43, he came to our rescue and offered to refurbish the Beemobile. And so the Beemobile made a trip to Harold's shop in Palo Alto, California, and he and his assistant fixed her right up. With the exception of a select number of summer parades, the Beemobile remains on display in the Hobo Gallery in the University Student Union, which was built in 2010. And then there are buttons. Buttons have been a part of the tradition of Hobo Day since the 1950s. Although we have discovered a button from 1913, this is the earliest button I have found. Some of the buttons reflect the theme for that year. Others reflect Jackrabbit football pride. Many depict Worry Will and Dirty Lil. And those poor USD coyotes, they always are getting the raw end of the deal. Of course, the homecoming football game is the highlight of Hobo Day. There's a 1948 football game at State Field. The original football field on campus was on State Field, which is where the SXR track is now, located just west of this building. Here's a 1955 football game at State Field versus USD. And in 1994, SDSU played Morningside College, and they beat them 56-17. But of course, it's not just gridiron action. It's the cheerleaders. And it's the mascots. Just kind of changed in looks over the years. And of course, entertainment. But mostly it's the fans who come, rain or shine, snow too. They come to watch the parade and cheer on the Jackrabbits at the football game, because Hobo Day would not be as successful as it is if it weren't for their fans who come every year to celebrate Jackrabbit Pride. And so, like this hobo on the 1951 sophomore float, we'll be rest until next year. So thank you. That's all I got.